Hello and welcome to the Connected Community Podcast. Today, my guest is Alyssa Severeid, and we talk about the topic of incense. Any plant matter material that we burn can be incense. So it can be the incense sticks, it can be Palo Santo, it can be sage, it can be sweet grass, and the list goes on. So Alyssa has her own podcast called Incense Explorer, and we just deep dive into this topic. I have been using incense for years. I really love it. Sometimes I just burn it because it smells amazing, and sometimes I burn it around ritualistic or spiritual practices. So we really dive deep into this topic and talk about the origins of incense, how to know about the quality that you're getting, why people use it, myths and facts surrounding it, and so much more. I really hope that you'll enjoy this topic. And please, if you're enjoying these podcasts, take a moment to give us a like, a share, and a subscribe. And I want to thank you so much for being here today. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to the Connected Community Podcast, a place to explore possibility through mindfulness, movement, and self-discovery. Our intention is to deliver insight and inspiration while fostering conversations that are genuine, unfiltered, and deeply human. We hope you will enjoy today's episode. Hi, Alyssa. Welcome to the Connected Community Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you.
I'm so excited to talk to you because today we're going to talk about everything around incense. And I think that a lot of people know what incense is, but then they don't know much more than that. So I'd love to hear what got you into incense in the first place.
It wasn't until a few years ago when I got into actually selling some products online related to smoke cleansing and smudging. And I started burning these plants, like white sage and Palo Santo. And I was like, whoa, this is really different than what I thought incense was. I started learning everything I could about different aromatics that have been used for, thousands of years by a lot of people. So yeah, incense is a lot more than the perfumey sticks, I soon realized.
Yes. And that's what I'm excited about talking to you about, because I think so many people have that misconception, or they could use it in a more powerful way, in a more intentional way. And I've been burning incense for, 30 years. And I feel that a lot of times it would conjure up a memory for me, or it would kind of cleanse a space for me. And now that I'm getting deeper in my spiritual practice, I'm using it for a lot of different purposes. But I'm curious the history of incense and where did it originate?
Yeah. So, incense has been used for thousands of years, and normally we credit to the ancient Egyptians to kind of the first formal use of incense, and it probably dates back even further than that. But there's a lot of interesting history surrounding fragrance in general and the ancient Egyptians. They had daily incense practices where they would burn frankincense in the morning and at night. They had special incense recipes that they made for special occasions that they wouldn't use every day. But the one that we know about the most is called kifi or kaifi, depending on who's pronouncing it. But it has dozens of different ingredients in it, and there's been some speculation about what some of them are, because of course the ancient Egyptians use different names for certain aromatics than we do. So there's been a lot of ancient Egyptian scholars that have looked at these recipes and tried to decipher them. And there's a lot of people that are reproducing that kifi that you can buy, from incense artisans. It's really, really interesting. And it's nice on an incense heater. It's got raisins, and I think it might even have wine in it. I don't know all the different ingredients, but you can find them online.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what was interesting is that frankincense didn't even grow near Egypt, but they would bring it in, and that was part of the incense trade. So we hear a lot about the Silk Road and the spice trade, but the incense trade was all part of that, and there was trade going on with all kinds of different aromatics used for incense.
Mm-hmm. What
So,
were the Egyptians doing with the incense? Were they using it for ritualistic practices?
yeah, it was part of their daily like prayer rituals. So the belief was that using burning incense was a way for them to communicate with the divine.
Mm.
So sometimes you will hear it described as, when you burn a plant, you are releasing the soul of that plant, and that allows you to connect with the non-physical realm.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that really, really interesting because you can't get that same connection from a synthetic material like you can from a real plant. Like this is a real living thing. So everything that fire touches changes.
Mm-hmm.
So when we burn incense, it also has this element of change and allowing us to evolve in different ways. And there's
Mm-hmm.
just a lot of interesting ways that we can
Mm-hmm.
use incense depending on what our intentions are.
It sounds like transformation is the word that keeps coming to my head, is that when we burn it, there can be a transformation, and there's a transformation of the stick when it meets the fire into the smoke as it dissipates into the air.
Yes. Yes, because you're taking something that's obviously physical. You can hold it in your hand and light it on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, you're taking something physical and turning it into something non-physical. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's not quite that simple because obviously it changes form and we have these gases that are released and whatnot. But
Mm-hmm.
when you think about it in simple terms,
Yeah.
they're just taking something that's physical and turning it into something non-physical. And obviously that's connecting them to this non-physical realm.
Yeah. One of the things I've come to learn about incense, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, sometimes people will burn it in an enclosed space, which isn't necessarily bad, but it needs some airflow behind it. Is that correct? Otherwise it can be, dare I say, toxic, or is that depend on what you're burning?
It is definitely recommended that you burn incense with some airflow. For one thing, anything we burn releases carbon and other chemicals. Like there's no way around that. Even if we're burning the cleanest, most basic plant materials there are, which I personally think is better than burning synthetics, even though everything is going to release some kind of chemicals. So yes, we should, when we are burning incense, I think it is important to take into consideration the safety of breathing in that incense in an enclosed space. So it's recommended that you have like some ventilation, an open window, that we're not like chain smoking incense. I've heard this term before. Like you probably shouldn't burn incense all day long. There have been studies that have been done on the health of people's lungs who, for instance, spend all of their days in a temple where incense is being burned all day long every single day. And there is a negative impact on your health if you're being exposed to that amount of smoke every single day. I usually try to limit my incense burning to one stick a day. And sometimes I don't burn it at all. The other thing I like to do is heat aromatics. So instead of combustion, you can use an incense heater and get the fragrance without the combustion, which is a really nice alternative if you're wanting to avoid smoke, occasionally or all the time.
What does that look like? An
So
incense heater?
If you've seen like an oil burner, an electric one, it's very similar. It's kind of like a little round dish, and it has a little tray that you put in the top, and you can put your resins or whatever aromatics on top of it, and you plug it in. And the ones that I like have a time setting as well as temperature. So you can set the temperature for whatever material it is that you're heating, because some materials are better hotter and some are better a little less hot. And then you can set the timer. So yeah, it's a really great alternative, I think, to burning incense too.
So let's talk about synthetic versus natural materials. it was a long, long time ago, probably 20 years ago. I went to India and I went to a place where they were making incense and rolling everything onto the sticks. And then there were all these different bright colors. Some were bright blue and some were bright red and some were green. And if you touched it when it was still wet, all those dyes really would come off on your hand. When they would burn, they had really intense perfumes. It didn't smell natural at all.
Right.
And now I'm working with sage and Palo Santo, and there's definitely a difference. So can we go down that path of? I'm assuming the synthetics are not as healthy or clean for us.
Yeah, definitely. Back in the day, traditionally, all incense was made from plant materials, but in the early 1900s, we started making these synthetic fragrances in labs. It's obviously cheaper to produce these synthetics, and so that's kind of the way that incense went especially in India. And that's mostly the incense that we see here on our shelves, because there's so much incense made in India, and it's cheap because it's made from synthetics, and synthetic perfumes, fragrances are cheap to make. And if you know anything about synthetic fragrance, it can contain like up to 4,000 different chemicals that manufacturers don't have to disclose, because if you look at the ingredients, if there even are ingredients, which incense doesn't usually have because they're not required to, it will just say fragrance. So who knows what that means? I mean, there's no way that we can know what's actually in it. And so to me, I prefer to know what's in my incense. I want to know what I'm burning. There hasn't been like much as far as studying the different chemicals that are released in synthetic incense versus natural incense. We know there's chemicals released in both because obviously there's combustion involved, but we don't really know a whole lot about the differences. And obviously every plant is going to have different chemicals released when you burn it. But there are also studies that show that certain plants have benefits when you burn them as incense. Frankincense and agarwood are two that have been found to like increase serotonin. So there are positive chemicals as well in plant-based incense with these natural aromatics that we don't get from synthetics. So the most common way that you see it is dipped. And that means that someone will take a blank incense stick, like a punk is what they call them. And it's a bamboo stick, and it's coated in either wood powder or charcoal or some combination. And then they dip it in fragrance oil, and that's your incense. So it's a really simple process. And
they dip it in oil because it seems like it has a thickness to it.
Yeah, so they dip it in like a type of fragrance oil. The bamboo stick has wood powder coated on it. They just take the stick and they dip it in fragrance oil.
Okay.
With natural sticks, the process is different, obviously. When you're working with whole aromatics, they're taking a powder of some sort of aromatic material. Maybe it's agarwood or sandalwood. Those are two really common ones. And they are making like a paste with the agarwood powder, the aromatic powder, and some sort of binder. So that'll be like a type of wood powder that doesn't really have much fragrance to it, but it's used to bind the aromatic powder together. So they mix those powders up. And then there's a few different ways that they make the incense. Some will make dough and then like roll it onto the stick. Or it can be made by a machine. If you look on YouTube, there's some really interesting videos that you'll see like in China, but they take a whole bundle of bamboo sticks and they'll have like this huge tray of powder. And then they dip the sticks in water, and then they just like toss the sticks in this powder, and then they keep dipping it in water and keep like adding layers to the sticks. So there's a few different ways that they do it, but those are the more traditional methods that don't include any added fragrance.
So then when I was in India and they were doing all these different colors and they had them like on these trays drying in the sun, and it took days drying in the sun. Or are they
Mm-hmm.
dipping it in, like, what was that colored powder?
So they add, do you mean in the, like the incense itself or the stick?
It was on the top layer.
Okay. So sometimes they'll like just dye the sticks, they'll dip it in dye. And other times they'll dye the incense itself. So they're taking actual dyes and adding it to the mixture of
Yeah.
incense to make it a specific color. And you do see that, that's another synthetic material that's added to incense a lot. Because if you don't add that, it's all kind of the same color.
Right.
There's not really any way to identify it by color. Personally, I stay away from the
Yeah.
artificial
Mhm.
stuff altogether. So if you look at like where most incense is manufactured,
Yeah.
it's going to be primarily in Asia. India is going to have the most synthetics,
Mhm.
whereas like in Japan and China, they use more of the whole aromatics. They will still use synthetics, especially in Japan with their like lower grades of incense. They
Yeah.
do use synthetics, but it's much more subtle. It's not like the sort of in your face fragrance that you get from a lot
Yeah.
of the Indian sticks.
So can I just assume that if it's natural, that they're going to highlight that on the box? Like they're going to promote the fact that it's a high quality product?
Potentially, but that's actually kind of tricky too, because sometimes manufacturers will claim that their incense is natural when it's not.
Well, natural is a trick word.
It is like natural has a lot of different meanings to different people, and so I've actually heard incense manufacturers say that they don't use synthetic fragrance, they use synthetic essential oils.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, so it's because they're taking like the components of what's in a natural essential oil and making a synthetic fragrance out of it. So there's like a lot of it's hard. It's a difficult thing to navigate because you've got these manufacturers that aren't telling you the whole story. When it comes to like Japanese incense, most of the time the packaging is in Japanese, which I can't read Japanese, so I don't know. And so it's like it sort of becomes this trial and error thing where you're just buying different incense and figuring out what it is after you burn it.
Yeah. I have a question for you, and I feel like I know the answer, and I'm not going to like the answer you give me. I'm going to ask it anyway. Nag Champa, because I love Nag Champa and have a feeling you're going to say it's full of synthetic crap. So let's hear it.
Okay, so this is really funny because I find everyone loves the Satya. Is that the kind that you use? Nag Champa. It's like it is the most it's the most popular incense in the world, I think.
It smells
everybody
so good.
Everybody knows it, everybody loves it. And this is what I'll say about it. It's not dipped. So it does have that going for it. It does contain some natural aromatics in it, I believe. It does contain synthetic fragrance as well.
So it's half bad, half good. It's okay.
It's probably not the worst one, but it's not great if you're looking for, natural options.
Yeah.
But I know so many people love it. And like, that's one of my goals at some point is to hopefully develop something that's natural that smells sort of like Nag Champa because everyone loves it so much. But some of those fragrances in Nag Champa are difficult to get from a natural incense because not every plant smells good when you burn it. It's really hard to get that fragrance without using synthetics. I will say that. So,
So I went to Dharamsala, which is where the Dalai Lama is, and that's basically a Tibetan city in India. And they burn an incense there that doesn't have a stick, that's thicker than an incense stick, and it's a brown. It's very prominent. I don't think it smells great. but it has a very distinct smell that I love now because it brings back these memories.
Mm.
And it burns slowly, and it seems natural because it doesn't have that fragrance that we're kind of always seeking as
Right.
Westerners. What is that? And why it's not on a stick? So what is that?
Yeah, so that's Tibetan incense.
Mm-hmm.
They sort of have their own style of Tibetan incense, and it tends to be more natural than most of the
Mm-hmm.
Indian style of incense that you see. It will still contain synthetics sometimes. You'll see it either in that stick form, or they also make rope incense. So they take like a paper and they twist it and all the fragrant materials inside. It does have like ground up aromatics in it, and it may also contain some sort of fragrance, but they use a lot of different aromatics in Tibetan incense, which they wild gather a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
You see a lot of cedar, spikenard, some frankincense. Like it's pretty interesting. I think it tends to be a little bit smokier than like
Yeah.
a Japanese style, and probably stronger fragrance. It's definitely different. It's not as refined, but if you love that sort
Yeah.
of
It's
more
earthy.
rustic,
Yeah, it's
yes,
earthy. It's
yes,
like
it
super earthy
is.
and like ground, like dirt or something.
Yeah, it's kind of musty, right? Like
Yeah.
it's got this really unique thing, this unique quality that you don't see in other styles of incense.
Yeah. And so this is just a wild guess. When outside of all the temples, and I've been all over like Southeast Asia and India, and incense in Asia, in that culture, in that part of the world is kind of the norm. And outside all of the temples and inside the temples, they're burning the incense. And I wonder, is that a way for them to like clear the energy, clear the spirits, or is it to that scent travels to draw people in, or all of that?
Yeah, I would guess that it's all of the above, but in Asia, incense has been a huge part of their religious cultures
Mm-hmm.
for, forever. And it's not just burning something for a
Mm-hmm.
pleasant background smell like so many of
Yeah.
us Westerners do. It really is meaningful. Every time they light a stick of incense, it's sacred.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really important part of their spiritual practice.
I mean, it makes sense because energy follows intention. So if you every time you light a stick of incense, there's that intention behind it, then it kind of creates that stronger connection to it. So you light it, and then all of a sudden that intention is behind it naturally. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we can even strengthen that when we connect with the plants, because the plants have their own energetic qualities, and different plants are sort of known for different things. And incense was used medicinally throughout
Hmm.
the traditional cultures, and in some places still is. Like if you in Vietnam, they make all kinds of incense out of plants that maybe most people wouldn't think are that great smelling when you burn them.
Hmm.
But they they have a medicinal value to them, and that's why they make incense out of them.
Yeah.
Is not necessarily for the fragrance at all, just because they believe that there's medicinal benefit to burning them.
Yeah. So let's talk about the definition of incense because I feel like sage and smudging things and Palo Santo get kind of like swiped into that category. And I feel from my limited lack of knowledge that incense is those sticks that we're burning, and then those other ones are like cleansing, smudging tools, or are all of them together?
In my opinion, it's all incense. It's
Okay.
burning anything aromatic. That's pretty much incense, even regardless of what your intentions are, because there's so many different forms of incense. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be in a stick. It doesn't have to be anything in particular. You can take like just a handful of cinnamon and put it on charcoal, and that's incense. If you're burning something fragrant, to me, that's incense.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there are different practices that we can do inside this, big umbrella of incense, like smudging, but it's all part of the same thing.
Okay.
Let's
talk about this controversy over Palo Santo.
Okay.
Because there is a big Palo Santo controversy about collecting of Palo Santo when it is threatened. Yes. How does somebody know where it's coming from and how to source it properly and how to feel good about what the environmental impact that they're having?
Yeah. So there are different types of trees that are known as Palo Santo. So I think it's, first of all, important to know the scientific name. The Palo Santo that we burn, the species is called Bursera graveolens.
Mm-hmm.
If you look that species up on IUCN Red List, which is a really great resource if you want to learn about threatened species of plants, it is in the least concern category. Palo Santo is something that is wild grown. So I think anytime we're working with a plant that is grown in the wild, we have to be mindful of how it's being harvested and just know that we want to make sure that we're not contributing to an issue of overharvesting, which has happened with many wild plants in different areas. So with Palo Santo specifically, there are two countries, it grows in South America. There's two countries in South America that I'm aware of that have protective laws in place. So to help with the sustainability of Palo Santo. So it doesn't end up being overharvested. And that those two are Ecuador and Peru. You're probably going to see most Palo Santo coming out of Peru. And as far as I understand the laws there, the only way that you can gather Palo Santo in Peru is by going out and picking up the pieces, the branches that fall from the trees naturally. Yeah. And they have to they have to be on the ground for a certain number of time before you can even pick them up.
Right.
Now,
so there's like complete deadwood.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's interesting how many different cultures use plant matter and burn it in sacred ceremony, because I think even the Native American culture has been doing that for many, many years. And it just seems that it's part of so many different cultures' spiritual practices. And it seems to like have a theme of cleansing and a theme of like connecting with divine. That's what that keeps coming back to me. So, for example, before a lot of ceremonies, there's that saging somebody with smoke and cleansing them before they go into a sweat lodge or before they go into a ceremonial space, to kind of cleanse their aura, and then they can go in.
Yeah.
What do you know about that practice with all the different cultures?
So my belief is that ancient cultures were a whole lot more connected to their surroundings, which included all of these plants that grew around them. And they really knew them. They knew them on a cellular level. They understood these plants in a way that we do not, because we just don't interact with them in the same way. We don't live outside around these plants. And if you look at like Native American culture, different tribes had different practices based on their own beliefs about the plants that grew around them. So we hear about white sage all the time, but it only grows in Southern California and in northern Mexico, in that region. So not all Native American tribes were using white sage. There's so many other plants that were important to their cultures.
Sweetgrass was one, right?
Yeah.
Sweetgrass is so amazing.
Yeah. Sweetgrass was one. Cedar. I mean, pine. There's just like pretty much most of the plants that grew in North America were important to different cultures for different reasons. Even if they didn't burn them, they used them for something else. But when it comes to using those plants to clear energy, it is, like you said before, about energy flows where your intention is. And what's the saying?
Energy follows intention.
Yes. So It's setting your intention, being really clear about that, and then using a plant that you feel connected to in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's how I use it if I'm going into a meditation practice. I mean, sometimes I burn incense, let's be real, just because it smells good.
Yeah.
But sometimes if I'm going to do a long meditation, or I'm going to do some kind of spiritual practice, then there is a ritual for me around using the incense, and then setting a very clear intention. So it's almost like it gets my mind into that space, and it's like, okay, here we go. This is the direction that we're going to go, and this is the container and the space that I'm going to create and I'm going to walk into.
Yeah.
And then yes, sometimes we just burn it because it smells great.
Yes. Same. I look at incense or sage or anything that you're lighting in conjunction with some sort of ritual or ceremony or meditation as like punctuation. It's like something that you can do to shift your energy into this other place where you're trying to go. And I think for me, incense can be helpful in taking me out of that like go mode, and like forcing me to shift my energy so that I can take a moment and light this incense or put it on my incense heater. Just going through those physical steps takes you out of your head and puts you back in your body a little bit.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I guess it's the same as spraying an essential oil spray to create that energy, or to get your mind into that space, or lighting a candle, or holding a crystal, or whatever it is for somebody. It's just to get us to enter into a different kind of headspace. Yeah. What do you think are the biggest myths around incense? Maybe they're all created equal.
Biggest myth. I think one of them would be that you have to use it in a certain way. Like there's this step-by-step process, and you have to do it the right way or it's not going to work. And I don't think that's not true. Like, you as a person can develop your own relationship with this plant and your own ritual and use it in a way that works best for you. There's no like rule book. Yes, you can look at these ancient ceremonies, rituals, whatever it is, just to get some inspiration, maybe just to give you like a starting place. But I think you need to feel your way into it and just learn what works best for you. Just thinking that it, like I once did, that it's just these really perfumey sticks, and there's so much interesting history and culture around incense that once you start digging into, you realize like how profoundly impactful it has been throughout the ages of history. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, and it sounds like for people, the best way would be to explore what resonates with them. So it could be the incense sticks, it could be the cones, it could be sage and Palo Santo, like it could be any plant material. And so it's finding the one that that lights you up, that gives you, that brightens your space, versus when you burn it and it just doesn't smell good.
Yes, but I will also say with natural incense, if you are accustomed to more synthetic and like in your face fragrance, natural incense is going to be a really big departure from that. It's much more subtle. It doesn't scream at you, it whispers. So I have found that just because you burn something once and you don't like it doesn't mean you should necessarily give up on it right away, because it can have to do with like the frame of mind you're in at the time, or if you're actually taking the time to like appreciate the fragrance and really like detect the nuances in it, rather than just being like, oh, I don't, this is terrible. Because oftentimes, and I found this to be the case with the natural incense especially, you can light it and that first whiff of smoke is probably going to be terrible, but you just have to let it sit and let it smolder, and then it develops, and it turns into something. And because plants, natural aromatics, there's huge variety in them. Like even in one tree, for instance, there can be all kinds of different fragrance from just one piece of wood. So it's not always going to be the same every single time. Whereas like with a synthetic, you're going to get the same thing every time because it's the same recipe, same formula. It's pretty much always going to be the same. But with these plants have personalities.
Yeah.
And we don't really think about it that way, but they do. And if we really want to get to know them on a deep level, we have to, take our time and not rush through it, and sort of maybe even journal about it. Just sit back and meditate on the fragrance itself coming from the incense.
Yeah.
And I think you can learn to appreciate these plants that maybe initially you would say, and
that's true, because I used to be really repulsed by like sandalwood, frankincense, vetiver, patchouli, and now that I've kind of been playing around with them, I realized like how they can work with me. In the beginning, they were just so bold and intense, and then like over time, figuring out the right amount and how to use it and when to use it.
Yeah. And I with meditation too, it's just like it's giving it that little something extra.
The
It's
little reminder.
enhancing it, just a little enhancement, but it's not overpowering you.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for all of this information. How do people connect with you if they want to? And I know you have some offerings, so I would love for you to share that.
Yeah. So I have a podcast as well. It's called Incense Explorer. And I am working, I did a season 1 last year, and I'm working on season 2. And it's surprisingly hard to find incense experts to chat with.
I'm sure it is. I can totally imagine that would be a challenge. Yeah.
So I'm trying to get enough interviews done so that I can get season 2 out there. But the other thing that I'm doing right now is a Kickstarter for my new incense brand. It's called Flora Botanical Incense, and it is all natural plant-based incense made from sustainable materials. Yeah, I'm super excited about that. And next will be getting the website launched, and which will be at floraincense.com, and then getting the product out into some boutiques and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll start to see it out there.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time and your expertise, and I really appreciate this conversation, which I had very little knowledge about. So I really appreciate your presence today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Community Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. I can be found at www.nikkiyoga.com, NICKYYYOGA.com. Until I see you again next week, I hope you have a beautiful day.